Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today here on Navy Sports Central. I am your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. This upcoming football season, Navy's Triple Option celebrates its 20th year, and this episode will be the first in a series where we will showcase one of the Mid's signature wins under Coach Niumatalolo. And as usual, we'll have an update on some of the spring sports teams that have gotten off to strong starts, as well as our question of the day and our mid-watch segments. So please, stick around. We've got lots of great stuff to talk about. All right, everybody, appreciate you joining us. Whether you are a regular listener or you're hearing us for the first time, thanks for making us part of your day. It's been a busy couple of weeks for Navy sports. The winter teams have either just wrapped up their seasons or they will be done this weekend, and the spring sports are now in full swing. So, let's not waste any time. I'm going to go ahead and get started with men's basketball. The Mids grabbed the number 2 seed in the Patriot League tournament, so they had a first-round bye, and they ended up meeting American University in the quarterfinals. They won that game pretty handily and then moved on to play Boston University in the semis, and that was a really exciting game. The Mids led most of the way, but the Terriers fought back, and their senior guard, Javante McCoy, hit 2 incredible three-pointers right towards the end of the game to get it into overtime. But the Mids were able to regroup from there. John Carter Jr. continued his strong shooting in the extra period, and Greg Summers hit on 2 consecutive and 1 drives to the basket to give the Mids momentum. And then finally, Sean Yoder nailed 2 clutch free throws to seal the win, 85-80. That got the Mids to the championship game against Colgate, but unfortunately the Raiders proved to be too much for them. They won their 3rd championship in 5 years by defeating the Mids 74-58. Actually, Navy was down by 24 points in the second half, but they managed to come back and cut the lead to 6 before they finally ran out of gas. From there, the Raiders were able to close them out for the win. So once again, Colgate will be the Patriot League representative in the NCAA tournament. And as far as the Mids go, I'd have to say that they probably, for me anyway, they met my expectations. Obviously, the goal of every program is to win the tournament title and then get that automatic bid to the NCAA championships. But after losing one of their best players in recent memory in Cam Davis, Coach Chalice's team didn't skip a beat on defense, and they used their depth on offense to make up for the scoring that they lost when Davis graduated. The Mids finished the year 21-11. John Carter Jr. and Greg Summers were the team's top 2 scorers, while Summers was the leading rebounder. And next year, the team brings back a strong core led by Jalen Walker, Tyler Nelson, and Sean Yoder. The Navy women's basketball team snagged a number 8 seed for the Patriot League tournament, and they played Colgate in their first-round game. The Raiders were seeded 9th, and the Mids came away with a 60-55 win to earn the right to play Holy Cross in the quarterfinals. And that was an unbelievable game. I was watching it on ESPN Plus, and unfortunately my feed froze with about 5.5 minutes to go in the game. At the time, the Mids were down by 8. Mimi Schrader had just hit a shot from the right elbow, and that's when I lost the feed. I was able to watch it eventually, though, and just couldn't believe how things played out. Sydney Watts hit 2 huge three-pointers to bring the Mids to within 6. And then with just barely a minute to go in the game, Jennifer Coleman connected on the first of 2 long-range jumpers. That one closed the gap to 3. Coleman's second three-pointer came with less than 10 seconds to go in the game to tie the score at 47. And then after Holy Cross hit a couple of free throws that put him back up by 2, things were set up for what was an unbelievable final sequence. The Mids inbound the ball from the baseline after that second made free throw by Holy Cross, and the Crusaders ended up knocking the ball out of bounds. That was a huge break for Navy because now they could take the ball in from half court, which gave them a much better chance to get off a halfway decent shot. On the final play, Sydney Watts inbound the ball, and she hit Jennifer Coleman coming off of a screen heading into the right corner. Coleman caught the ball facing away from the basket. In fact, she was looking right at the Navy bench when she caught it, and somehow managed to turn and shoot, getting off this high arcing shot with no angle at all, but somehow it managed to bank high off the glass and went straight into the basket right as the buzzer sounded. The whole team went berserk. It was just an unbelievable finish. And you could just see just the joy on their faces and the celebration. And Holy Cross, of course, was just stunned. They were the number 1 seed, and their tournament was done. So the Mids moved on to face number 4 seeded Bucknell in a semifinal, and it was a tough game. There was no doubt about that. It was a 3rd contest in 5 days for Coach Taylor's team, and they just didn't have their legs. The shooting rhythm was off. Coleman did score 27 points in that game, capping off just what was a brilliant career. On the season, she averaged 22.2 points per game, and her total number of points of 689 blew away the old mark of 530 set back in 2003. And I got to tell you, there's no telling what Coleman could have done if the pandemic had not impacted her junior season so much. She is definitely one of the best players Navy has ever had. Okay, we're going to move on to lacrosse next. Both the men's and women's teams are off to pretty good starts. The men are 4-3, and they just beat Colgate 11-10 in a come-from-behind win. Pat Skalniak had 5 goals as the Mids outscored the Raiders 5-2 in the fourth quarter to get that win. But it's also worth noting that Xavier Arline, who is obviously Navy's backup quarterback, scored the team's first goal. It was his first of the season. Arline is an attackman, and he got the Mids on the board by putting a shot past the Navy goalkeeper's left shoulder and into the corner. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Arline does this season. He came to Navy pretty highly recruited, and after talking with the football coaching staff, they gave their blessing in terms of him trying to compete for a spot on the lacrosse team. And obviously, he made it on his own merits, and this is his second game that he's played in and his first start, I believe. And, things are clicking along quite well. I mean, he basically took a little while to kind of get over that hamstring injury he suffered at the end of the football season. Plus, it took some time getting used to the speed of the college game in lacrosse. But by all accounts, he's doing pretty well. By the way, Skalniak, who, like I said, had 5 goals in the game against Colgate, leads the team with 29 points. He's got 17 goals overall to go along with 12 assists for the year. The men's team takes a break from league play when they go against Hopkins on March 18th, and then they come back and play Holy Cross the following weekend. Now, on the women's side, they're playing extremely well. Right now, they are 6-1, and their last 2 wins have come against number 15 ranked Drexel and number 16 ranked Johns Hopkins. They never even led in that game against the Blue Jays until Lindsey Beardmore scored the game winner in overtime to take the 13-12 win. Lele Denton, who is a sophomore, leads the team in points with 20. She has 16 goals and 4 assists. And senior Casey Dietzel from Warrington, Pennsylvania is right behind her with 8 goals and 11 assists to give her 19 points. The Mids' next game is on March 19th against Bucknell, and that will be streamed on ESPN+. Now let's take a look at men's and women's tennis. These two teams have gotten off to fantastic starts so far. The men are 17-7, and they are actually led by a couple of brothers. Finn Garner is a junior, and his younger brother Luke is a freshman. They are from nearby Arnold, Maryland. Finn has a 16-6 singles record so far, and Luke is right behind him at 15-8. And the two are also undefeated as a doubles pair. They are currently 3-0. Right now, the team is taking some time off for spring break. They will be back in action against Boston University in a couple of weeks to begin Patriot League play. The women's tennis team is 13-1 right now and undefeated at home, by the way. They recently beat Temple in a really close match, 4-3. Emily Tannenbaum leads the team with an 18-8 record. The Mids' 12-match home winning streak is actually the longest since they won 15 in a row back in 2013. They will begin their Patriot League schedule on March the 26th against Lehigh. And finally, I did want to recognize the men's and women's indoor track teams for sweeping the Patriot League championships a couple of weeks ago. That's not the first time they've done that. They did the same thing last year. For the men, it was their 12th overall title and their 8th in 9 years, while the women took home their 6th overall championship and 3rd in a row. Navy's director of track and field, Jamie Cook, noted that both teams went into this meet as underdogs, but the men won 9 of 18 events, and they used their depth to finish with 264 points, which was 76 better than second-place Army. Boston University was a distant 3rd. And for the women, they won 7 out of the 18 events to post a 31-point win over the Black Knights, and again, just like on the men's side, Boston University placed 3rd. The Mids didn't have a lot of time to rest. The outdoor season got underway this past weekend in San Diego. Both teams are the defending outdoor track and field Patriot League champions. So we'll see if they can add another one to that total in a couple of months. Okay, that covers all the teams I wanted to talk about today in this sports update. But before we move on, I wanted to comment on a story that came out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida over the weekend. Apparently, there were 5 cadets from Army who overdosed on cocaine that was laced with fentanyl. One of the 5 admitted to the hospital was a football player, and there was a second player involved, but he was not hospitalized. I also read this morning where the police have made an arrest in this case. So just a couple of thoughts here. First of all, I sincerely hope that all these cadets are okay. I mean, I can't think of any death more senseless than one due to a drug overdose. But at the same time, it is tough for me to feel any sympathy for them at all. These cadets aren't stupid. They had to know that both the conduct system and the honor code are in effect 24/7, and neither one goes on spring break. They also should have been aware that it is now common practice for drug traffickers to lace both cocaine and heroin with fentanyl. That's been going on down in Florida for years. When I worked in pharmaceutical sales a long time ago, I promoted a transdermal fentanyl patch that was sold to help manage debilitating chronic pain in cancer patients. It's a synthetic opioid, and let me tell you, it is one you do not want to mess with. Fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine, and traffickers use it to make drugs like cocaine more potent, which means more profit for them. Their customer base gets addicted faster, and they keep coming back for more. It doesn't matter to the dealers how many of them die. Anyway, these cadets have basically thrown away their educations. It's not every day you see someone flush about $250,000 down the toilet. That's something they're just going to have to live with, and it's pretty sad when you think about it. Okay, enough about that. I know that didn't fall quite within our sports update, but I thought it was worth mentioning because there's a lot of talk about it over the weekend. In any case, we are just getting started, so please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Okay, it is time for our deep dive segment, and as I mentioned in the opening, Navy's triple option turns 20 this year. So a couple of weeks ago, I came up with an idea to mark the occasion. I decided to go back and pick out the games that I thought played a role in defining both Coach Johnson's and Coach Niumatalolo's respective legacies. And the first part actually has already been completed. Last week, I published a feature in the Navy Sports Nation blog entitled Celebrating 20 Years of Navy's Triple Option. And what I did there was I broke down one game from each of Coach Johnson's 6 years at Navy and the impact it had on the program. Now, the plan is to do something similar with Coach Niumatalolo in a series of 2 or 3 podcast episodes. I'm not going to go through every single one of his 14 seasons, but I have identified 5 games that really stood out to me during the time Coach Ken has been at the controls. Obviously, there have been more than that. And in fact, I can think of about 2 or 3 potential games that we won't be discussing, but that's because I've already covered them in the blog either last year or the year before. So I will definitely put a link to those in the show notes. All right, here's how things are going to go. For each game, I'll give you all a little bit of a backstory just to level set everyone. And then I'll go over some of the reasons why Navy won the game. And then finally, I'll talk about why that particular one made the list as opposed to one of the other games that season. Now, let's go ahead and get started with our first one. I decided to go with the Navy-Notre Dame game that was played on October 23rd, 2010 in the Meadowlands. That was in Coach Ken's 3rd full season as head coach. The Mids came into the game with a 4-2 record, but it easily could have been either 5-1 or even 6-0. In the very first game of the season, they lost what many felt was a winnable game against Maryland. The offense had driven all the way down to the Maryland 1-yard line with less than a minute to play, but the Terps defense was able to hold, and they ran out the clock to win the game. Then, a month later, the Mids lost to Air Force for the first time in 8 years, and they only managed to score 6 points, so that was kind of a bummer. But on the bright side, they were on a 2-game winning streak going into the Notre Dame game, and one of those wins was a nice come-from-behind effort against Wake Forest, where Ricky Dobbs hit Greg Jones on a 6-yard TD pass with less than 30 seconds to go. That gave Navy the 28-27 win. Then they beat SMU the following week. That's what was going on with the Mids halfway through the season. So now let's see what's going on with Notre Dame. The first big piece of news was they had a new coach in 2010. At the end of the 2009 season, the Irish fired Charlie Weiss. And interestingly enough, that year they did get off to a 6-2 start, and they were ranked 22nd in the BCS poll. But then the Mids beat them for the second straight time in South Bend, and Notre Dame never recovered. In fact, they didn't even win another game. They ended up finishing 6-6. And after that, the Notre Dame fan base had had enough of Weiss. So athletic director Jack Swarbrick fired him. And, the thing was, Weiss signed a huge contract in 2005. I believe it was a 10-year deal. So when they cut him loose in 2009, Weiss was still earning on that contract for another 6 years after he left. And, so he's basically coaching at Kansas. And in fact, he might have even gotten fired from Kansas as well before the 2015 season. So there's a pretty good chance that he was earning on 2 contracts without having to coach a single minute of college football. Anyway, to replace Weiss, Swarbrick hired Brian Kelly, who had done a great job turning the program around at the University of Cincinnati. So he gets all established there. They did get off to kind of a rough start. They were 1-3 after 4 games, but then they ended up winning 3 games in a row. And so basically Kelly had him going in the right direction when they traveled to the Meadowlands to play Navy. On paper, it figured to be a pretty good game, and I know there were more than a few Notre Dame fans who were really looking for the Irish to take down the Mids after losing 2 out of the previous 3 contests. But that didn't even come close to happening. Navy just crushed Notre Dame 35-17 in probably what was one of the most dominating games I've ever seen them play. The Irish got the ball first, and they tested Navy's defense early. They drove all the way down the field, got down to the 8-yard line for a 1st and goal. 3 more downs got them to the 1, and it looked like they were just going to punch it in from there. But the Mids defense stuffed Irish quarterback Dane Christ for no gain, and the Navy offense took over on downs. That's pretty much where the fun began. Now, I don't know how much the Notre Dame defense knew about Navy fullback Alex Teach going into the game, but I can guarantee you that it did not take them very long at all to figure out that they were in for a really, really tough afternoon. The Mids, on the 3rd play from scrimmage, they'd gotten to the 10-yard line, so the first 2 downs got them to the 10. So they're looking at about a 3rd and 1. And I just figured that whatever play Navy ran out of the option was going to be enough just to get the 1st down, and they would just go on from there. But the next thing I know, Teach just busts up the middle between 2 perfectly executed blocks, and he rolled 54 yards into Irish territory, which put the Mids on about the Notre Dame 37-yard line. Then 3 plays later from about the 31, Ricky Dobbs connected with Teach on a short wheel route along the left sidelines. And in fact, he almost overthrew him, but Teach reached up and pulled in a pass with one hand. He had 2 blockers in front of him, and he followed them all the way downfield until he dove over a Notre Dame defender at about the 2 to go in for Navy's first touchdown. So pretty good start for the Mids, but it was still early. Notre Dame got the ball on their next possession and drove right down the field again. But once more, the defense toughened up, and the Irish had to settle for a field goal. So when the Mids got the ball back, it was pretty close to the end of the first quarter. I think there was about 2 or 3 minutes to go. So Dobbs brought the offense out onto the field again to see what they could do. This was more of a typical triple option drive. The Mids drove 77 yards, and they just used 12 straight running plays, didn't throw the ball once. But more importantly, they ate up 7 minutes of game clock, and Dobbs took it in from 3 yards out, giving the Mids a 14-3 lead. Now, from here, it looked like Notre Dame was on the way to figuring things out, because on their next possession, they took about 5 minutes to go 72 yards on 16 plays and finished up that drive with a 16-yard touchdown pass from Dane Christ to T.J. Jones. So that made the score 14-10 once they got the extra point. And right after that, they forced the Mids to punt. So now they're getting the ball back towards the end of the second quarter with a chance to take the lead. And this was when the Navy defense really started to kind of take control of the game. So here's what happened. Basically, Notre Dame had the ball deep in their own territory. They had a 3rd and 6 from their own 7, and Chris went back to pass, and he tried to find a receiver at the 30-yard line, but he was intercepted by Navy cornerback Devon Richardson, and that was huge for 2 reasons. Number one, it gave the Mids 1 more possession before halftime, and then they're also going to have the ball first to open the second half. So there's a big opportunity here to break the game wide open when Dobbs led the offense back onto the field with less than 2 minutes to go in the half. They take 4 plays to get to the 9-yard line, so now they've got a 1st and goal. Dobbs took the snap and headed left before pitching to slot back Gigi Green, and it looked like 2 Notre Dame defenders had an angle on him, but Green was really, really shifty, and he had excellent speed too, so he was able to get around those guys and started angling towards that left pylon, but he did have 1 more guy to beat, and it looked like, no joke, that Green was giving away at least 30 pounds to him. So if he would have stayed upright trying to get in, he would have just gotten clobbered. But what ended up happening was that from about 2 yards out, he just went super low on a dive. I mean, he'd look like he was maybe 8 to 10 inches off the ground, and he ended up keeping his left hand down low, and he used it to kind of keep him off, keep him from hitting the ground. And with his right hand, he extended and just barely touched inside the pylon to score, and the guy never touched him. So it was an incredible touchdown, and that put the Mids up 21-10 with the extra point. The Navy fans were just going crazy in the Meadowlands, and when they came out for the third quarter, the Mids didn't waste any time at all adding to that advantage. Dobbs took the offense down the field again, and they used a long 40-yard pass to Greg Jones to get to the Notre Dame 9, and then Dobbs ran it in from there to stretch the lead to 28-10. From there, Notre Dame was on life support, and the Navy defense knew it. They just started teeing off, really did a great job controlling the line of scrimmage. Jabari Tawane, who is arguably one of the best defensive linemen ever to play at Navy, had 5 total tackles, 2.5 for a loss, including half a sack. and he was just dominating the guy in front of him. I mean, it wasn't even a contest. In the meantime, on the offensive side of the ball, Dobbs had the triple option just on cruise control, basically. Alex Teach continued to destroy the Irish on the ground. He ended up with 210 rushing yards, and the most impressive thing was that he averaged over 8 yards a carry. So the Mids scored one more time to make it 35-10, and then the Irish did add one more cosmetic touchdown to make the final score 35-17. This was probably one of the more impressive wins I've ever seen a Navy team put together in the triple option era. As I'd mentioned, Teach just ran roughshod over the Notre Dame defense. He only used 26 carries to get those 210 yards. And Dobbs was no slouch either. He picked up 90 rushing yards, scored 3 touchdowns, and he also threw for 1. The Mids didn't turn the ball over, and they weren't flagged for a single penalty the entire game. So it was a big-time win for the program any way you look at it. Okay, this looks like a good time to step away for a quick break. And when we come back, we'll jump into some of the reasons why I put this game among the top 5 in the Coach Niumatalolo era so far. All right. Thanks for staying with us here on Navy Sports Central. Carl Darden here with you. And now I wanted to get into a couple of the reasons why I put this Navy-Notre Dame game from 2010 as one of the 5 that helps define the Coach Niumatalolo era, at least so far anyway. I mean, this list could change, obviously, depending on how long he remains the head coach. But for now, for me anyway, this is one of the top 5. And here's why. Up until that point, I don't think I ever saw the Mids turn in such a complete performance on both sides of the ball. The win the previous year over Missouri in the Texas Bowl comes really, really close, but they did give up a long touchdown on the game's second play to fall behind early. In the Notre Dame game, they were ahead from the very start. They never gave up a big play. Their longest play from scrimmage that they gave up was a 23-yard pass, and the Mids were just in control from the very beginning. They never, ever took their foot off the gas. But here's the biggest reason why this particular game made my list. And it all has to do with the statement they made following some of the comments that were coming out of last year's game after the Mids won 23-21. So just to kind of backpedal a little bit, during all those years that the Mids played the Irish, I got the sense that every time Notre Dame won, they just got more and more patronizing. And it was like they were saying, things like, look at those plucky little midshipmen. Isn't it great how they try so hard? Good for them. They're going to do a great job defending this country, but they're never going to beat us in football. And basically for 40 plus years, you had Notre Dame beating the Mids like a drum, patting them on the head and sending them back home, just saying, hey, better luck next year, dudes. Of course, that all ended in 2007. The streak came to an end, but that particular Irish team was not that good. I mean, they were 1-7 going into the game, and they finished the year 3-9. So then when they won and got back on the right track in 2008, everything seemed to be right in the Notre Dame universe. But then when the Mids came into South Bend and beat the Irish for the second straight time on their home field, you started to see just a little bit of a change in how the Irish fans were talking about the Navy football team. Now, all of a sudden, the Mids weren't a team of tough scrappers that played hard on every single down. Instead, they were a team with a gimmicky offense that relied on cheap cut blocks to get an advantage. Some fans even began to question why Navy was still on Notre Dame's schedule. So who knows if any of that was bulletin board material prior to the 2010 game, but what I really liked was how the Mids responded as a team. They basically, like I said, just dominated the Irish, and it was almost like they were just like flipping them off with both hands, coming out of that game saying, hey, this is what you can do with your gimmicky offense comments and all that sort of thing. But I will tell you when I had the most fun after that 2010 game, and that was the following morning when, and this is something I always did, starting from 2007, I would go pull up the South Bend newspapers online and start reading some of the comments following the articles covering the game. Now, if you guys want to have some fun, the next time Navy beats Notre Dame, whenever that is, go ahead and do that. And I promise you will not be disappointed in terms of some of the comments you will read. There's one I read that I still remember even after 11 and a half years. One really disappointed fan who just could not believe the lack of competitiveness in Notre Dame after that 2010 game said this. He said, I sure am glad it's Navy's football players who will be defending our country after they graduate. If it was our players, they might as well just change the name of South Bend to Paris. So I read that and I just couldn't believe it. But that's what you'll hear. I mean, they have no mercy on their team when they get beat like that. I think the biggest message the Mid sent with that win over the Irish in 2010 was basically, we don't care if you're a top program. If Navy is on your schedule, you better come ready to play. Otherwise, there's a pretty good chance you could get embarrassed. And if you don't believe me, just ask Brian Kelly. We'll be right back. All right, we are back. We are back. Thanks for staying with us, everyone. It is time for our question of the day. And before we get to it, I wanted to clean up a couple that we had hanging out there. We had to wait until the respective regular seasons came to an end before we could, figure out what the correct answer was. Now, you'll remember when we did the feature on women's basketball that we were discussing Jennifer Coleman's performance. And through the first 8 games, she had scored 20 points or more in 7 of them. And the question was, in the remaining 20 games, how many more times do you think that she would score 20 or more points? And the choices were 5 to 8 times, 9 to 12, 13 to 16, and 17 to 20. The correct answer was 13 to 16 games. Turns out that Coleman ended up scoring 20 or more points in 14 of the remaining 20 games. And there were 13 of you who got that answer right. I'm going to go ahead and run through those names real quick. Please forgive me if I mispronounce the last name. I'll apologize in advance for that if that happens. Here are the folks that came up with the correct answers. Thomas Moyers, Gary Brandt, B.D. Smith, James Mangan, Tracy Clark, Christine Passon, Jeff Bostert, Rich Martucci, Mike Kavanaugh, Richard Cox, Scott Gordon, Melanie Doherty, and John Cable. So good job, everyone. I really appreciate the engagement on that. And it actually gave me an idea for our question of the day for this episode, and I'll get to that one in a second. Our next question we wanted to take care of had to do with men's basketball. And the question was, how many conference wins would the eventual Patriot League winner have? And those choices were 12 to 13, 14 to 15, 16 to 17, and I think I did have another choice, 18 or more. The correct answer there was 16 to 17. Colgate ended up winning a total of 16 games. They went 16-2 in the league. So there was actually one person who selected that one, and that was Zane Jackson. But I was looking at the votes for 14 to 15 wins, and Zane also voted in that one. So I'm not sure about this voting twice thing, but Zane, this time I'll cut you some slack. I'll give you credit for that one. All right. So nice going there. And now finally, we are up to our question of the day from our last episode. And you recall that I had a great discussion on rugby with my 2 classmates, Gardner Howe and Larry Clark. And we were talking about the difference between the rugby ball and the standard American football. And one of the things we discussed was the fact that you don't see any forward passing in rugby because, number one, it's against the rules. But I guess the bigger question is, even if it wasn't against the rules, how easy would it be to do? And the answer is really not that easy. The first thing you'll notice is that the ends of the football are flat as opposed to pointed, like the football that we use in the NFL and in college. The second thing is the rugby ball is a little bit wider in the middle, and we're talking about that short circumference, which is the circumference around the middle of the ball as opposed to the circumference around each end. So when you compare it to a ball that we use in the NFL or in college, that short circumference is about 21 to 21 and a quarter inches. The question I put out in our last episode was, what's the short circumference of a rugby ball? So our choices there were greater than 21 and a quarter inches and less than 21 and 3/4. Greater than 21 and 3/4 and less than 22 and a quarter, greater than 22 and a quarter and less than 22 and 3/4, and then finally greater than 22 and 3/4 inches. And there was another choice up there that my classmate Paul Barr added, and that was math at this hour. So I guess Paul and my other classmate Tom Mortensen weren't too interested in figuring that one out. But I appreciate the participation anyway, guys. Okay, so the correct answer was greater than 22 and 3/4 inches. In fact, the actual short circumference is 22.85 inches around the middle there. And we had 4 people who got that right. Mark Thibodeau, Renell Bone, Joe Arnoso, and my old roommate, Larry Clark. So again, thanks to all of you who jumped in and answered that question. I appreciate the engagement, and let's go ahead and keep that up. All right, now it's time for the question of the day for this episode, and this is actually spur of the moment. It actually came to me as I was reading off the folks who got the correct answer to the Jennifer Coleman question. And I noticed that there was quite a good mix of people who answered that one with respect to their connection to the Academy. If you look at the total number of people in our group, we've got right around 700. So I was kind of curious to find out how that breaks down in terms of people who went to the Academy. Maybe you're the parent of a midshipman, or you just happen to like Navy sports like the rest of us and wanted to jump on the page. So here's the question. What bucket do you fall into when it comes to our Navy Sports Nation group? Are you a Naval Academy grad? Are you the parent of a midshipman? Did you have a close friend or relative that went to the Academy? Or are you just a big Navy sports fan? I'm really kind of curious. So I'll go ahead and put that up on a poll on our group Facebook page, and I'm looking forward to seeing your responses there. All right, it is time to see what's going on with our athletes on the Midwatch. The last time we checked in with Molly Mangan, she was preparing for the Patriot League Indoor Track and Field Championships, and she did really well. Overall, she earned a total of 24 points. Molly finished third in the 400 meters, and then she ran the anchor leg for the 4x400 meter relay team that took second. And then finally, she won the 200 meters, which was really awesome because going back through the season, it wasn't a race that she had run all that much compared to last year. Anyway, Molly now heads into the outdoor season in really good form, so congratulations to her on a great year indoors, and we look forward to seeing that continue into the spring. And finally, we will wrap up with Andrew Cerniglia. He placed second in the EIWA Regional Championships, reaching the finals for the very first time. Cerniglia won 3 matches to qualify for the final, and that included a win over his Army rival Marcus Hartman for the second time in a row. And he also defeated the defending EIWA champion Josh Humphreys from Lehigh by pinning him right at the end of the first round of that contest. Cerniglia is 27-6 on the year, which is the most by a Navy wrestler this season, and he qualifies for his second straight NCAA tournament, which takes place in Detroit, Michigan, starting on March 17th. That's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. We have been getting a great response to our question of the day, so if you want to jump in on that, just go to the Navy Sports Nation Group Facebook page, and I'll go ahead and pin that to the top so you won't miss it. And just a quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. By the way, the music used in Navy Sports Central comes to you courtesy of Audio Jungle. This is a great site for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in the podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.